Okay, welcome back, guys. It's Mr. Hutchings here. We are in the process of going through paper one. That's Medicine Through Time and the British sector of the Western Front. Hopefully by this point you will have already watched the video for question one, the describe two features question. Question two, the utility question, or 2A, I should say. Today we're going to look at 2B. Now this is probably the most hated of all the questions, certainly by history teachers. Because it can be quite confusing. The way that it's worded can be quite problematic for students, and it's very very difficult to understand what it's asking you sometimes. But I'm hoping that in this video I can break it down a little bit for you, and hopefully clear it up a little bit, so that when you face this in your GCSEs, it's not quite as difficult as it can be. So first of all, it's important to note that this is 2B. So it is intrinsically linked to 2A. You can't do this before you do 2A. So you must do 2A first. You've got to do that utility question first. By this point, you should have worked with source A and source B a little bit. So you should be familiar with what they're talking about, the provenance, etc., etc. Now, this one is asking you just to look at source A. So we're only looking at source A here. And it's asking you how you could follow up source A. Now, that's an interesting phrasing, isn't it? When it says follow up, it means what could you find out more about? So it's asking you to be a bit of a detective here. What do you want to know more about in that source? Is there anything that you could ask questions about in order to get more information? Basically, you're leading a further investigation on one element of the source. Now, it should be noted that source A is obviously a written source, so that in some ways makes it a bit easier because we can just pick a particular quote and ask questions about that. When it's a visual source, like source B, it makes it a little bit trickier because you have to actually pick out something that is happening in the source and ask questions about that. Okay, but this one's asking us about a written source, so we're going to go with that. It's quite a big question here, so you have to read all of it. In your answer, you must give the question you would ask and the type of source you could use. Complete the table below. So you need to complete the entirety of this table, and you can see it's a 4-mark question, and there are 4 sections to it. The first thing we need to do is to pick the quote that we want to find out more about. What do we want to ask a question about? What do we feel like we want to know more about? Now, if we go back and read it, look at our annotated version, there are loads of elements to this. We've spoken about how this first section is talking about conditions in the trenches. So we might ask more about that. We might ask how long they're in the trenches, for example. The second section is telling you about how much impact it had, so how many men were being affected. And then this last part is talking to you about ways they tried to prevent it. So ways that they tried to either treat trench foot or ways they tried to stop it happening altogether. Now, the first thing that you want to ask yourselves when you're looking at this is whether or not the question you're going to ask has a source that you know of. Now, they won't accept really general things here. You have to know that this type of source exists. So you can't, for example, just randomly say soldiers' diaries, because we don't know that the answer to the question you ask is in that diary, because we don't have them all in front of us. You just have to think of a type of source where this kind of information might be. Okay, so you need to follow all of this through. The first thing we need, though, is the detail. So I'm finding the quote. Now, I quite like this bit at the bottom that's talking about ways they tried to prevent it, because what it doesn't mention here is whether this worked. So that's one thing I might quite like to find out. All these things that they did it actually work? Did it reduce number of cases of trench foot, for example? Did it stop people getting trench foot? It doesn't say that in the source, so that's something extra that I might want to follow up. So I'm going to go for provide dry socks for the troops. So I'm just going to quote that here. Provide dry socks for the troops. Okay, now I need to ask a question about that. So they were provided with dry socks for the troops. Does it tell me how often they were provided with this? No, it doesn't. So that could be a question I ask. I could ask, okay, how often were they provided with dry socks? Perfectly reasonable. I could ask, did it work? I'm going to go with that, I think. Question I would ask, did the dry socks reduce instances of trench foot. Okay, next question. What type of source could I use to answer this question? Okay, so if I'm asking if it worked, I need to be looking at numbers of people who got trench foot. So it's probably safe to assume that medical officer records would hold that kind of information. Medical officers are probably going to record that, aren't they? So that's what I'm going to put here. Medical officer records. Okay, now how would that help me answer my question? So if my question is, did the dry socks reduce instances of, that's going to bother me, instances of trench foot? Well, reading medical officer record might help answer my question, because they would list the number of people needing treatment for trench foot. And there you go. I've followed the whole process through. I've picked out one of the quotes that I want to find out more about, but again, has to be linked to the problem of trench foot. So I focused in on the fact that they were given dry socks. I've then come up with a question that I can ask. Did the dry socks actually reduce instances of trench foot? Okay, I could have quite easily gone with, okay, how many sets of socks were they given? How often were they given them? Because it doesn't mention that in the source, so that's something I might want to find out more. I've then come up with the actual source that I could use to find this out, and you must be sure that this type of source exists, and you must be fairly certain that it would help you answer your question. What you don't want to do here is where it says how this might help answer my question, just write really generic things like, oh, because it would, or when you're up here, the question I would ask, I want to know this because it's interesting, something like that. You have to give a real answer. And then lastly, you follow it through. If that's the type of source that you're going for, how is that type of source going to help you answer your question? Okay, now on the face of it, it seems like quite a simple process, but believe me, these can be tricky, so it's really, really worth practicing this a few times. If you get it right, it's 4 nice, easy marks, okay? But you must treat each section with care. Any questions, as always, pop them in the comments, and I will do my best to get back to you. Take care.